Good to see everybody. Today we're going to be covering a build guide for the strongest, the most versatile, and probably the main build you're going to want to work towards for Season 6, and that is Mighty Throw for the Barbarian. It's an absolute blaster. I had a lot of fun with this as well because that is a very new play style that's kind of pretty fresh, right? We haven't had anything like this before. And before I get into the build guide, there is something I want to address, and that's just kind of the general sentiment around the Barbarian at the moment. Yeah, sure, it's not the most powerful class in the game anymore, right? But does that mean it's unplayable? No. I mean, Diablo, at the end of the day, even with the changes to difficulty, is not that hard a game. And also, you know, after having played it for more than 5 minutes, I'm just saying what I'm saying, you know, not like 100 hours either, but like 50, 60 hours, I can tell you for certain you absolutely can get into Torment 4 without Uber Uniques, and you can even get an Uber Unique pretty easily with this season. And once you are fully kitted out, it's not like you're not going to be pushing super high into the pits anyways. And let's be honest, how many of us are actually even that bothered with pushing like up to a 99th percentile pit? Probably very few people. So does it even really matter? I don't know. Anyways, let's get into the build. So let's start off by talking about what I like to call the engine, what makes the build tick. And we know it's a Mighty Throw build. A Mighty Throw is a weapon mastery skill, much like Death Blow. So as standard, it typically has a cooldown. However, through the use of a unique, the third blade, and by the way, this unique is mandatory for this build. This is build enabling. The rest of the uniques, not so much. Uber uniques, definitely not. You will not need those to make this build work. I will include an Uber and a non-Uber version in the build description. What you're seeing on screen is, of course, the Uber version, but this gear is not representative of what I would say you should get. This is just what I was able to get during my short time with the review copy of the game. Anyways, so what this does is it converts weapon mastery skills into core skills. Well, actually it doesn't convert, it also makes them core skills. This means basically two things. First, it can now be spammed infinitely, providing you have enough fury to do so. It takes a little bit of a damage hit as a result, but trust me, that is not an issue. And it also gives it the core skill tag. What that means is that you're able to scale the damage of your weapon mastery skills with core skill affixes as well. Think things like ranks to core skill on like this amulet, or anything that's like plus damage to core skills. This will all now work with your weapon mastery skills, and this is really, really cool. Allows you to just throw weapons all over the place and just make an absolute mess. The next tech, and I really like this one, and a shout out to Woody because it's the first time I saw it used to great effect, is the Yen's Blessing shout tech. Now, Yen's Blessing, what these do is that every 8 seconds, there's a chance that, and this chance is very high, so it's basically a guarantee that the Yens will cast a skill that you have on cooldown that is a non-mobility, non-ultimate skill. And we want this to be a shout. The way that we do this is we just have ults and mobility skills on our bar. So we have leap, which is just great for moving around. We have our shout. For this build, I'm using War Cry. I have a different shout for different builds. Kind of depends on what they will benefit from the most. And then we have charge. This is fantastic because it allows us to break CC. So if we get stunned, frozen, we just use charge for that. We have Call of the Ancients as an ultimate. And then, of course, Bash and Mighty Throw don't have cooldown, so they won't be applicable to that either. So as long as we keep War Cry on cooldown, Yens will keep casting it every 8 seconds. Now, what we do to make this even more valuable is that we take the passive Booming Voice, which increases the duration of a shout. So we go from 5 seconds to 7.4, meaning there's only a very small window of downtime between our shouts, keeping them up basically permanently without having to have any cooldown reduction in our build whatsoever. Now, finally, Yen's Blessings just have really, really good stats on them. We have an insane amount of resist all elements, and this is really, really, really important for this season because getting capped for resistances is very hard for Torment 4. Very hard. So this is an excellent item to use, basically regardless of the build that you're trying to run. The next tech that we're going to be using is going to be the Eretz Bearing. It's not really a tech, but it's basically a sort of self-contained loop in which that we can use this item to not only get resistance capped, but also maintain a near 100% uptime of our Call of the Ancients, so long as we hit the Masterworks on that particular affix, which of course I've not because, you know, what is luck? I don't have any of that. And the reason we want to do that is because we get a ton of benefits. Now, the Ancients themselves do a little bit of damage. It's not really anything I'd get too excited about. It's not what wets my seat. But what does get me a little bit soppy is the 20% bonus attack speed and the 25% increased damage. This is a very, very nice bonus, especially when we can have it basically all of the time. And then we also get some fury from when Korlik does some damage with his frenzy, and this ends up being quite a lot. So this helps a bunch with sustaining us because we are going to be using Unbridled Rage. We definitely need that fury per second, or we kind of get tanked from time to time. And then the final tech, and this is probably my favorite, is the use of bash. Very clever use of bash. So first of all, we have bash with the, I believe it's combat bash. Let's have a little look here. And what happens with this is that after critically striking 4 times with bash with a two-handed weapon, it's important that we have it set to a two-handed weapon, your next core skill or weapon mastery skill will overpower. And this is an overpower build. We like this. This is very, very good. Now, what you do to make this basically work 100% of the time is take bash cleaves. This means bash can hit multiple enemies at once, and if it crits multiple enemies at once, you can get all 4 stacks in one swing, and this will happen basically all of the time, providing you're fighting at least 4 enemies, right? With this build, or at least with the way that gear works in the game at the moment, it is not too unreasonable to expect to get very, very close to 100% crit chance. So you can definitely get to a point where you can guarantee that basically every attack is an overpower, which is huge. It's a massive amount of damage, and you're probably seeing from the gameplay just all of the orange numbers. It is madness, absolute madness. Now, that's not the end of it, however. We are also being able to benefit from 2 of the brand new passives. So we have over here Warpath, which is a damage multiplier, which applies 12% damage every time we overpower. This is every attack, so we're basically just getting 12% extra damage for free. And then we have Belligerence, which is a 9% damage multiplier every time we use a basic skill, which again is all of the time. We just put these straight in and get a huge damage boost to the build. And all of this just has a ton of like downstream interactions with one another, which equals a really high damage build. Now, that is basically the sort of like the big main text. There is, of course, a lot more going through the build, but now that we understand that, I think we can get into the skill tree and go through the build as I would normally, and everything should make a lot more sense. So yes, we have Combat Bash. We have Warpath. Going down into here, we have, of course, Imposing Presence and Martial Figure, along with Belligerence. Now, your max life scales your overpower damage. So you'll see that each iteration of this build will include a lot of max HP rolls across the gear, Paragon board, and stuff like that. That is why our overpower damage goes up quite a bit when our max life is higher. So the more, the merrier. Now, for the Uber version, I do use Power War Cry. For other versions, I may be using Tactical Rallying Cry, and you may even see Challenging Shout. Depends on what the build is missing. This build, it just wants raw damage, is extraordinarily tanky. This is exactly what I want to go for. Booming Voice, again, very important for this build because it's what allows you to keep that near 100% uptime. 1 point into Raid Leader gives us a nice little just sort of static heal that's basically on all of the time. Now, I've only got 1 point into Leap and 1 point into Charge. I really don't see too much value in these. However, if you want to go for a faster version of the build, I wouldn't blame you for putting 2 points into this and 2 points into that, but it is not necessary. I wouldn't do it personally. We then have the Berserking passes for extra damage reduction and Fury regen. Over here, Pit Fighter for extra damage and damage reduction from distant enemies. Slaying Strike, this is only really important when pushing hard content, so when you're fighting bosses that actually stay alive for more than 1 hit. And then we have, of course, Mighty Throw down here into Warrior's Mighty Throw, because all we want is all of that big juicy damage. We've got down here, we've got Thick Skin into Counter Offensive for the fat damage boost, and then 1 point into then 1 point into wait, what the is this word? 1 point into Irrepressible, which basically gives us permanent fortify for 1 point investment. Absolutely juicy. Call of the Ancients, we talked about this earlier on. We do have 3 points into Furious Impulse to help with the resource regen. And then we take all of the damage multipliers over here. Heavy-handed for increased crit damage. We got Brute Force for overpowered damage. And we've got Wallop for increased damage when using a bludgeoning weapon, which we will be using. We are using our mace for everything. And then finally, for our key passive, we're running Unbridled Rage. The reason for this, it's the biggest damage boost out of all of the ones available. And it synergizes really well with things like BLT, as well as our aspect of Encroaching Wrath, which I currently don't have because I couldn't find any gloves. But it is what it is. There you go. But if anything in the skill tree is slightly different than what you see on the build planner, that is because I've updated it to reflect the best changes. As time goes on, things will inevitably be discovered and refined. And that will be the reason why. Check the changelog down in the bottom if you want to know why. Now, let's quickly go over the gear. Again, this is the Uber version, but I'll try and talk about the non-Uber version a little bit while I can. Air Expedition is absolutely the go-to. This thing is cracked. It does a crap ton of damage and has an insane suite of affixes on it. Core skills is where you're going to want to try and get all of your masterworking and greater affixes. Critical strike chance is fantastic if you can hit that as well. The other two, you know, whatever. But the unique effect here just gives us an insane amount of damage. The alternative, the non-Uber version, is the Ugly Bastard, which is actually a very similar helmet in kind of sort of way. The unique effect is basically the same. It gives you an 80% multiplier to any direct damage after converting it to fire if you're berserking. So the condition is you have to be berserking to get the damage boost, but that is basically a permanent thing, so you don't really have to worry about that. When you're running the Ugly Bastard, though, you will be using Wrath of the Berserker instead because it has a lot of synergy with that, because it gives you a lot of cooldown reduction as well as like ranks to Prolific Fury and aggressive resistance. So you lean more heavily into that side of things. Now, as for your chest, Tyrael's Might is fine. I wouldn't actually recommend this for any of the builds. However, I would rather be using Shroud of False Death. The reason being, it's just a huge damage multiplier with all of the extra passive ranks that you get. The rest of the stats on the Shroud actually kind of suck, but Tyrael's Might is still very, very good. It's a fantastic defense option. With this, you are practically impossible to kill. So, you know, if you prefer that kind of fantasy, then this can definitely help you meet that goal. As for the Uber version, I'd recommend a regular chest with all resistances on it, just strength and max life. Nice and simple, nothing too crazy. For gloves, not Fist of Fate, though Fist of Fate are a good option if you hit a really great pair. They can kind of tie you over until you find an ideal pair of gloves. But an ideal pair of gloves, probably going to want to go for crit chance, strength, core ranks, and then have Encroaching Wrath on those as well. That's going to work a lot better for you than Fist of Fate. Pants, like I mentioned before, Eret's Bearing. You want to try and masterwork the Call of the Ancients cooldown on these. It's fantastic. If you are running the Ugly Bastard version of the build, you will be running Tybalt's Will instead, because that build uses Rallying Cry and will have near unlimited uptime on Unstoppable, meaning that Tybalt's will give you that huge damage boost and that huge boost to damage reduction. Yen's Blessing, that's going to remain the same. We need this unique effect plus that all res, absolutely a must-have. For your two-handed weapon, you're going to want to run Strength, Max Life, Overpower damage. And then on this one, or actually on either one, you're going to want a Mighty Throw, chance to hit twice. And then on the other, you want Bash Cleaves. Then the final tempo will be Weapon Mastery on both. As for the affixes, it's Strength, Max Life, and Overpower damage again for both. Greater affix priority being on like either Strength or Max Life. And then your tempers on the one that has Mighty Throw hit twice, you want them on Mighty Throw hit twice. And then on the other, just try and hit Strength if you can. Forgot to mention, for gems in your gear, straight rubies all the way through. Just give me that strength, baby. That's what we want. Then for the two one-handed weapons, you're going to want a third blade. This is mandatory again for that reason of being able to convert weapon mastery into core skills. The second, if you have a Doombringer, max life scales our damage very, very well. And this has an insane amount of that. And then, of course, it has a really good damage reduction affix and unique effect on it. If you don't have one of these, you'll be running a regular one-handed mace with strength, max life, and overpower damage. Your temper, chance to hit twice with Mighty Throw on it, as well as weapon mastery skill. And then you're going to want to try and masterwork the chance for Mighty Throw to hit twice until you get that chance to 100% between the two weapons. And then you'll want to masterwork strength instead. And then for the last weapon, we've kind of really covered that. But in terms of talking about aspects, one is going to want Edge Masters and the other is going to want Herculean Spectacle. This is a really important aspect. It gives you an extra 2 weapons when you throw weapon throw, which is a huge DPS increase, as well as giving you a huge DPS increase. We're using Edge Masters as opposed to Limitless Rage or Encroaching Wrath here. Just find that it has the most uptime against the other 2 aspects. I like to have Encroaching Wrath on the gloves. And then if I am using multiple uniques, I'm not going to be able to actually fit Limitless Rage on here. But for the non-Uber version, I would have it on one of the one-handed weapons, with Inner Calm being on one of the rings instead as well. You'll see that in the build planner. Now, as for runes and gems, you'll notice that I have rubies in my gear and the runes actually in my weapons. This is just simply because rubies are far more valuable than these emeralds, because crit damage is additive. It goes into a very large pond of additive damage and makes basically no splash whatsoever, whereas strength is multiplicative and also gives me armor. So that's the reason we have the runes on the weapons, just less of a valuable slot here. Then as far as the runes go, the ones I have in game are not representative of the latest changes, so I'll just have to tell you which ones I'm using. But we are going to be using the cast non-channeled core skill because of course Mighty Throw is now a core skill, but we won't be using Druid's Petrify. This no longer gives us a critical strike chance. We'll be using Fex, which gives us +3 to all of our skill ranks, which is just a nice big DPS boost across the board. The uptime on that is not too fantastic. Definitely going to need to experiment with the latest changes when the game goes live, so keep an eye on runes. These may be the most likely thing to change. On the second one, this one I think will remain the same, however, and that is stand still while fighting for 2 seconds, gain 20% max life for 4 seconds. This stays up damn near permanently because it's a very low offering cost incantation or whatever they call it, and standing still is very easy to do, especially on higher content. So this is a fantastic boost to our survivability and of course our overpowered damage. Now moving on to rings. For rings, we're going to want to get strength, crit chance, and attack speed on one of them. Attack speed, I like to have it around about like 50-60%. That way, with everything else that's included with the build, you end up roughly around like 100%, which gives you about the right amount of attacks per second, not to go too fast. And what I mean by that, and this is kind of like a high level thing that most people won't need to bother about knowing, you can only have 12 mighty throws out at any one time. So if you start throwing them fast enough that you can create more than 12 per the duration of the first one that you threw, they will then start to despawn, which is actually very bad for your DPS. And it's not a problem. So around about like 50 to 60% is kind of where I'm landing right now. But the stats in the stat sheet will always reflect the most current information. So keep an eye on that just to make sure you're not going too far or too little into attack speed. Crit chance, we want to try and get as close to 100 as possible. Anger management aspect, extremely important for this build because it is our only way of berserking. So this is another reason why staying at high fury is very, very important. And you'll see that throughout a lot of the choices that we make. Then for tempers, Call of the Ancient cooldown and damage while berserking. We will need this 1 damage while berserking roll. That is what's going to allow us to cap on our Blood Rage node. Now, I don't actually have the Paragon board in game, so we'll swap over to the planner in just a second for that one. And then finally, as far as the masterworking goes, you want to try and hit the strength on this one. Possibly the crit if you've not got the 100% crit rate yet. Cooldown for Call of the Ancients, you'll want if you're not at around about like 80-90%, but as long as the masterworking is correct on this, you shouldn't really need to worry too much about that. If you have a greater affix plus the masterworking on the pants for Call of the Ancients cooldown, you won't want this roll. You'll actually just want to go for flat resource regen instead. Second ring is basically the same thing, but you'll probably drop the attack speed for max life, or if you have a starless, you'll go for the starless. For the masterworking on a starless core skills, that's where you want it. Everything else is kind of like meh. That's definitely the go for here. For a regular ring, you're going to stick Inner Calm on that, or Encroaching Wrath if the Inner Calm's on your gloves. It doesn't really matter. And then you're going to try and hit the greater affix and the masterworking on critical strike chance. For the tempers, you'll want to go for resource regen and possibly weapon mastery damage. If you don't have the cooldown for Call of the Ancients, then maybe another roll there would be fine. Then for both versions of the build, we are using Banished Lord's Talisman. It's an overpowered build with almost guaranteed crits, meaning that we're just going to be getting that multiplier all the time for free. Plus max life and core skill ranks are very, very good damage for us. There is a world in which a perfectly rolled triple GA legendary amulet may be better. However, that's going to be extremely hard to get and will require some testing and some sort of further math in order to determine if that's the case or not. For now, this is definitely the best option. Then real quick, before we do jump into the planner, let's take a quick look at the weapon technique. We've gone for two-handed axe, which gives us the 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And then for the mercenary, we've gone for Fariana. I've gone down the right side here for the attack speed. And then furthermore for the attack speed here, gives me a really, really nice boost from time to time. Then for our hired reinforcement, I have Sabu, who gives me the explosive charge, which detonates every time I hit an enemy with an overpower. Just a nice little burst of damage there. You can also use Ra here if you need damage reduction. That's a very viable option as well. But let's jump over to the planner and take a look at the Paragon tree. Now, the video is getting a little bit long, so let's just talk about the most important parts here. But first, it is important to know that on Mobalytics, we don't have the latest version of the Paragon boards at this moment in time of recording, because those changes haven't been released. They will be when this video is out, so what you'll see in the build planner will represent the up-to-date changes. But we can talk about the important stuff like glyphs and stuff like that. So we have, of course, Crusher in the first board here for that juicy overpowered damage while wielding a mace. We will be using a mace. Then it gives us a bunch of additive damage as well on top of that, which scales quite a lot with the amount of strength we'll be using. Bonebreaker will be the second board, gives us a ton of damage reduction. We get a bunch here from when healthy, armor, health, damage reduction while fortified. Running Wrath in this board as well because we get that Fury back, important for sustain, but it comes with a good legendary bonus and a pretty good additive bonus as well. We don't need Bonebreaker, so we're not going for it. The board is just that good that even without the legendary node, we like it. Carnage is the third board. We get that attack speed bonus, more damage while while close, so more damage reduction. It's insane. Might is helping boost all of those blue nodes to the moon, so they're getting a ton of value from those. Reason why damage while berserking is important is because of Blood Rage. Now, Blood Rage, you don't need to bleed enemies to get the damage bonus, okay? But as long as you have 300% damage while berserking, you'll get the maximum 30% from this one because it's a 10-to-1 ratio, and that's multiplicative, so this is huge. This is like in every single build. We will be bleeding enemies. Now, the latest version or the prime version of this build, when it's all fully set up properly, will be using, in fact, some thorns to use outburst and to use tough as nails to bleed enemies. That's why you'll see I've gone for all the damage while bleeding and all of that kind of stuff up here. It is low priority because this is using, all of the Paragon points. You're not going to go for these ones first, but you can use them because we will be using a little bit of thorns, especially with Shroud of Death, because that is going to give us some passive ranks for free. In this board, we are using Challenger. This board has the most strength in it out of the options that we are using, so we want to try and boost that as much as humanly possible by having it here. And then finally, we're moving over to the last board, which is Decimator. Decimator, just a good double damage multi. We get 10% for making enemies vulnerable, and then 10% for overpowering a vulnerable enemy, which is every enemy that we hit, so this is absolutely fantastic. We're going into basically every rare node around here as well, all of the extra armor, life, and damage reduction. We got so much damage reduction, dude. It's insane. Then for the final glyph, we are using Dominate on this one. This is going to give us an overpower every 20 seconds, which doesn't really matter, but it gives us a really juicy multiplier for overpower damage and a very, very high multiplier for overpower damage as well. Now, one thing that will be changed in the super high level version of the build is that Wrath is most likely going to be changed out for Revenge. And what Revenge does is it gives us a multiplier to enemies that hit us and we do Thorns damage to them. But that will be in the correct planner. So if you look at what the planner's got, that will be the right thing for you to follow for that version of the build. I've done a pretty extensive write-up for these this time around, so all of the information and questions you could possibly have are more than likely going to be answered in here. It's still a work in progress, but we're going to be putting a lot more work into these this season, so I hope you find them useful. Links for everything down in the description below. Let me know what you thought about this new format, if it was too long, if it was too too fluffy, or if you really appreciated the level of detail in talking about like how things actually work and alternative options to the things I'm actually showing on the screen. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this useful. Lots of new content on the way. I look forward to seeing you in the Vessal of Hatred. Take care. Love ya. Bye.